The purpose of this podcast is to offer inspiration, conversation, and inquiry around the path of self-development and self-actualization. As many of you know, that is the YBL ethos. How do we self-actualize? How do we show up? How do we do the work? So I invite guests onto this show, meaningful guests, ones that inspire me to talk about their journey for self-development, self-actualization, and creating a life that is fulfilling and meaningful for them. In this podcast, episode 3, Slaying Your Dragons with Compassion, I welcome psychotherapist and author Malcolm Stern. Malcolm shares beautiful stories of overcoming grief, the loss of his daughter, and how that has inspired his work. He facilitates and runs groups. He talks about his process of writing his book. The conversation at times had me choked. It was such an emotional journey and a beautiful conversation. I'm really excited for you to see it. So without further ado, let's get this ball rolling. Enjoy episode 3 of the YBL podcast. Hello, Malcolm.
Hello, Josh. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to have you here. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
How are you today?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
In a big city, it's different from being in lovely, peaceful Devon.
That's where you
That's where I live now.
Nice. Yeah. What took you down that part of the world?
Well, I originally went there as a family. We moved there, but I went back to London for 10 years. But then when the pandemic came, I went back. Let's try it out, and so I tried it out. And actually, I live on my own, and I really like living on my own.
It is a nice thing to do, isn't it? To have all your own space.
Exactly. Like I've got here at the moment.
Yeah. I've lucked out on this little pad for a short
while.
while.
That's good.
Enjoying it. Feels like a little personal retreat.
It's good.
Yeah.
And
that's actually something that I have learned to do, and the pandemic sort of invited me to explore that, was to find comfort in my own company.
Good.
And I think before that, I always used to seek comfort, needed to be around people, but
well, we often look for it. We think the relationship's going to bring it to us. We think, all these things are going to bring us joy and peace of mind. But actually, it's getting to know ourselves and getting to navigate, as I see it, the various trials and tribulations we're all going to go through. No one gets off scot-free.
Absolutely. Do you think that people spend time running away from that?
Of course.
Yeah.
We distract.
Yeah.
We use addictions. We use computer games. We use sugar. We use cigarettes, alcohol. They're all ways of avoiding being with ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So is that so we have, I suppose now would be a good time for you to share a bit about what you do with the work, and then I'd like to ask you, I suppose, how you bring those distractions into people's lives and work with them in that way.
Well, I'm a psychotherapist and I mainly do groups.
Yeah.
And in those groups, we make a series of practices. The first of which is bearing witness to each other. So we actually still ourselves, slow it all down.
Mm-hmm.
And so when someone is working on something, the whole group is with them rather than distracted thinking, oh, what am I going to do tonight? Or, we make a practice of being present. Mm-hmm. And then we make a practice of being kind and also being authentic. So these are all various practices. So my work is, as a group psychotherapist, is to create a safe but integrity-filled, authentic environment.
Beautiful. An integrity-filled, is that like an energetic space that everybody sets the intention for that?
Yeah, we are practicing integrity. We're not trying to make each other feel better.
Yeah.
We are giving each other feedback. Mm-hmm. We're not deliberately trying to be cruel in our feedback.
Yeah.
But so we're trying to be compassionate, which is, I wrote a book based on all this, which is called Slay Your Dragons with Compassion.
Slay Your Dragons with Compassion.
And that's what we're trying to do, is to practice compassion with each other.
It's so beautiful, because I noticed that, in some situations for myself, I set an intention, when I sit down to record a video, I set an intention, how do I be as authentic in this moment and arrive authentically? How do I arrive authentically sitting here? And there's this whole journey in my inner space that sort of is pulling. And so the process of creating that, it's not something that one can achieve overnight, I suppose.
No, it's not. It's I think it's a practice. Funny, I was just talking to someone today, and it's Eckhart Tolle, who I'm sure you've heard of.
Yeah.
He was a very rare example of someone going to the edge of desperation, suddenly being awoken and staying awake.
Yeah.
A lot of people have awakening experiences, sometimes for a day, an hour. In my knowledge, some of my friends have been through it for 2 weeks of feeling like life is awake for them, but they don't stay in that space. And so I think it's all about, for me, what my groups are all about is about practice. Yeah. Practice working in that space so that we're actually developing a muscle that we're strengthening.
Oh, it's beautiful, and I'm just, as you're talking, it's awakening my inner journey, because I know that I have those moments where I have a big epiphany or a big breakthrough, and I feel just like I see the world in a whole other way, and then something happens that moves you back into
exactly. We get tripped up by something and we lose our equanimity.
Yeah. So why are we forced on this roller coaster?
I think it's the human condition, and I think we got brought up with fairy tales or Hollywood movies where we expect something different.
Yeah.
But I think the reality is we are on a roller coaster. We don't know who we are, where we came from, where we're going. We are here for a temporary period of time on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And what are we going to do with our lives? And for me, Rabindranath Tagore, the Indian mystic, puts this very well. He said, "I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I woke and found that life was service. I acted and behold, service was joy." And that's very much what I feel when I'm doing what I was born to do, what I feel like is in my blood. I'm alive, I'm happy, I'm contented. There's nowhere else I'd rather be.
Yeah, I resonate with that. The energy just comes, like, for me, like I could be with a client really tired, really going through, I don't know, not necessarily going through something, but the moment I'm in a space working with somebody, it's just like everything goes and something flows, doesn't it? Something else comes into the space.
There's an energy field that gets created, and when we're, it's almost like a friend of mine once called running a group like being a guru for a day.
Yeah.
So that you are that wise person. So in the microcosm of the one-to-one session, you are that wise person in that hour with a kind of 50 minutes if you're full of that sort of stuff. But I like to do an hour. But so I think that's actually what happens to us, is that we enter into a space where we switch off our own ego needs and we tune into what's in front of us.
Yeah. And even like beyond the realms of the client, then, as a therapist, could we apply moving our own ego needs into day-to-day living to help us sort of be in this awakened state? Would that move us into the path of that?
Well, are we going to have practices? You see, do we get up? And I'm telling myself as much as I'm telling you.
Of course.
Are we going to get up in the morning and meditate? Are we going to actually set our day?
Yeah.
I don't most mornings.
Yeah.
I have an intention to sometimes, but then I forget about it.
Yeah.
Do we then practice kindness as we're in the street? Do we look on people with kindness in our eyes? Do we notice when we get jarred and actually choose to breathe more deeply and to just still ourselves? These are the practices.
Yeah. So what would you advise somebody, I suppose, in moving, they're moving through a particularly anxious phase, or they feel out of rhythm? I mean, a lot of the readings that I do are about stepping into your full potential, and you mentioned you're doing what you love, it's in your blood. What those people that are maybe feeling a bit lost in that or not knowing, so I guess my question is framed in advice for that, but also maybe you could share with us a little bit about how you arrived at your work as well.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how I arrived at my work. I find myself fascinated, so I'm sure it's going to be interesting. So I was an estate agent in my 20s, and I took LSD. And suddenly it's like the universe was nothing like what I imagined I lived in. And my friends still to this day think I never came down from that trip. This is not an advert for drugs. I don't think that, I think that a lot of what happens today with hallucinogenics and other drugs they're used too much for leisure and not used as a sacred sacrament. But I took that and then I wanted to live my life differently. And so I tried this. I sailed on the Rainbow Warrior with Greenpeace. I worked in a terminal cancer hospice for a while. Worked in an old people's day centre. I wanted to be valuable in life. And then one day I went into therapy because I kept having relationships that stunk. And I thought the the factor that's in all of those is me. So, if there's something, must be something in me that's creating that.
Yeah.
So I went into therapy with Ian Gordon Brown, who was the founder of transpersonal psychology. So I was a very, very skilled, experienced, and wise therapist, which was really helpful. And then one day I went to a therapy group, and I walked into that group, and I watched that person who was running the group, and I thought, she's not doing this very well. She's so arrogant, who do you think you are? So, you've never been in a group before. But somehow I knew that was my thing. And, here I am nearly 40 years later, still it's my thing. And I think there is something about that group field that I've invested in, and I've found ways of engaging in that I'm really happy about. It's like, that's my work.
That's really beautiful. And what really struck out for me was the moment you took responsibility, the moment you went, what's the common denominator in this?
Yeah, good. Yes.
And that has always been the same for me. I seem to go through this process of, at first I'm the victim. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? It's so unfair. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh no, there's something in me that is attracting this. It's reflecting a wound in me. How can I now flip it around into that? But that is a process. And I just think that, I suppose each time that process is getting shorter and shorter and shorter as responsibility is easier to take. Because
I think that's the thing, as we become more accomplished in our capacity to recognize what's happening to us. What I often say in groups is this, that it's not what happens to you that matters, it's how you deal with what happens to you. So I lost my daughter, and that was a turning point in my life. It's deepened my practice. It has taken me on a hell of a roller coaster ride, but I can now say, sort of nearly 10 years on, that something profound came out of it. And I wrote this book, Slow Your Dragons with Compassion, because I had to find a way of expressing it. So sometimes we need to find, for me, it was getting it down on paper. And I've written 3 books, so this is my 3rd book. Both the others took me 4 years to write, but this one took me 7 months. And I really feel it's because the learning was flooding through me from the tragedy that I had been.
Bless you. I mean, my heart whenever you speak about that.
Thank you.
Really does.
I'm
sure everybody watching also does that prayers and
unless they're bastards.
Unless they're bastards. No, you're bastards. I would hope that people watch this are doing that.
So I often say in groups, so I have someone be in the centre and they look around the group. I go, what do you see? Oh, I see compassion about other people. I say, well, they're also ourselves. So we are a mix.
In the groups, or in life, I suppose.
And we're a mix in the groups as well. We're a mix as human beings. We're not just profound and wise.
No.
I mean, I am profound and wise, I know that, but I know I'm also bloody imbecile at times.
And I find that, in my journey, any sense of wisdom that comes through an idiotic mistake that I've made in the past.
Exactly. And then that becomes our textbook learning.
It does. So we are on this planet feels like a school, a big old education.
It's a fucking tough school, let's be honest about it. It's not an easy place to be. And we have to deal with people, we have to deal with terrible tragedies that happen. We have to deal with the intergenerational trauma that that you and I will carry the intergenerational trauma of Jews, for example. That we carry that, and whether we like it or not, it's in our psyches.
It feels like it gets activated, doesn't
it? It does.
And it's how we choose to. We have to listen with that and sit with that in the same way that we'd hold somebody who's experiencing a trauma from a horrendous thing.
And often what we can do if we're with someone who's in a trauma is be present. There's the practice. Being present. Don't want to fix them.
No.
Don't want to sort of just distract them. But can you be with them in their trauma? And Stephen Levine, who wrote a book called Who Dies, written a number of books about death and dying. He said that when someone's dying, there's no bullshit. There's no room for sort of the polite, hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. How are you doing? There's no room for that. It's real. And he said that they know their radars are so finely attuned that they know who can be with them in that place who can't. So the doctor might be someone who's brusque and not very empathetic and just sort of and he'll say, how are you? They go, oh, I'm fine. The cleaner might come into the room with the hospital and say, and they can feel a resonance.
Yeah.
And they may choose to talk there.
Yeah. So in that sense, on the cusp of death, on the cusp of life and death,
Yes.
might be the only time some people ever experience something.
If we haven't awoken until then,
yeah,
that might be the place that wakes us up.
and that's a big time
Yeah.
for such a thing.
But if we're wise, we'll wake up earlier. You know, we'll do what we can
Yeah.
to awaken ourselves. We'll go and spend, you know, a week in silence in an ashram or something along those lines, where we are giving ourselves the gift of slowing, stilling, coming in touch with the deep knower inside, who is often hidden from us.
Yeah. The knower, as in the biblical knower.
No,
the knower.
The knower.
I am the knower of me. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. The biblical knower as well.
The tidal waves of emotion are coming, and we've got to build our art to.
Well, there's something about building our art. I think that's not a bad analogy, actually.
Yeah, I agree. Because sometimes, you know, and I suppose, like, as somebody that considers himself conscious, doing the work, always having that curiosity, sometimes I will feel like, there's a period where I'm gifted at the moment of stillness, neutrality. I'm neither up nor down. I'm so grateful for this. I'm not in drama. I'm also not here, like, present. But then something will just happen that just brings that surge up. And for me, it can be involuntary. It's forceful for me. It does sometimes feel like that emotion in the tarot is the cups, you know, the wells of emotion spill over. And so I always get curious that some people have the capacity to just push that down or run away from it. And are you good at calling people? So we hold space with compassion in therapy. And this is a segue to this question, is where we hold space, we don't try to fix them.
Yeah.
Because everybody does, I believe, has the capacity to fix themselves. But is there ever the need as a therapist to be direct and to name some hard truths? And what's that sort of journey like for you?
Well, I studied humanistic psychology with some very, very big names, David Videla, John Heron, Tom Feldberg, and others. And so I studied with some really brilliant teachers. John Heron said there are 8 different, I can't remember what the 8 are, he said there are 8 different interventions we do as therapists. And the one we need to use really minimally and only once in a blue moon do we use it is that of advice.
Right.
That of actually trying to guide someone into a particular way. If we're good therapists, we'll find ways of letting them, as you said, find ways of fixing themselves. Well, it's not even about fixing yourself, it's find ways of actually facing yourself and seeing what your options are.
Right. Yeah. And it feels scary for people to face themselves.
It's very scary. It's very, because, you know, there's always the fear that we're nothing.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there's a thing called the imposter syndrome, which I'm sure you've heard about.
Yeah.
And I think everybody suffers to some degree.
Yeah.
Because where have we come from and where are we going? What made you into a chief executive of the company? You know, it's just like, I remember one coaching client who once, he was trying out some different coaches to see, and he ran a big company of coaches, very smart guy. And because I called him on the imposter syndrome, he took me on. Because actually he kept that hidden from everyone else. Yeah. And he obviously felt safe enough to dare to look at a place where he was insecure. And that's where the work often is in our vulnerability.
Yeah, I agree. And for people to even step into the therapy room is that space of vulnerability.
Yeah, that's right.
Such an act of bravery.
Sometimes that's what that very choice is what kickstarts the process as well.
Yeah. So when we say facing themselves, just because I want to hear more about your book, really, facing themselves, is that facing the dragon, slaying the dragon, or what's the dragon?
Well, the slaying the dragon is I see that there are 2 rules for slaying the dragon. One is to speak our truth wherever possible.
Right.
I brought up in a family where my mother told white lies, because she thought that was the right thing to do because you never hurt anyone. Yeah. But if we try never to hurt anyone, we also end up being not real. So there's something about speaking our truth. And then the second part of this is never hurt another more than is necessary.
Right.
Not never hurt another. Yeah. Never hurt another deliberately. Yeah. And so I think there's a practice that we do about slaying our own dragons, of facing ourselves Because when I was talking about slaying the dragons, it's like people say, well, dragons are lovely, why should we be slaying them?
Yeah.
It's about cutting it off at the roots. So if we half do something and then we just park it for another day, we're not really doing very much except distracting ourselves from the problem.
Right.
But if we decide to go all the way in and face this demon that's inside us that needs to be faced, or the demon that's outside of us that needs to be called, then we can do some really wonderful things if we have the consciousness to be able to do.
Yeah. And that feels like, I suppose, the task. We were talking earlier about the role of the therapist in the space, and it makes me think that, the word guru or healer, or there's sort of an archetypal energy that kind of I connect with, which is, I just call it the therapist. There's a way of being. And what was my question? It was related to sort of, people might have this dragon, might be aware of this dragon, but might not be aware of how to deal with it or to face it.
Then we sometimes need support.
And
that's one of the practices in my book as well, is creating a Sangha. Sangha is a spiritual community where people with like mind that are there to support each other.
Right.
So sometimes we go, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And we can't do everything by that. The I Ching, do you know the I Ching or the I Ching? The Chinese oracle, which Confucius said at the age of 70, he'd start to grasp the rudimentaries of it.
Wow.
And Jung brought it to the West.
Yeah.
And the I Ching says, until we reach a certain stage in our evolution, not only do we have the need for the support of others of like mind, we have a duty to seek that support.
Right.
So there's something about, in this time of growth, which we are forced into if we are to let ourselves develop and grow and evolve.
Yeah.
We have to seek our support.
Yeah. I meet people that have been through some form of awakening. Like, part of me feels like COVID forced people to, I spoke about that at the beginning, to sit with themselves. And there's an awakening, like the life being lived at that point wasn't the true authentic self. But then I meet a lot of people that I have conversations with, and they'll say to me, oh my goodness, you speak exactly what I'm thinking, but I haven't found people. So, and I guess I'm more connected to people with sort of my age group, like the 32-year-olds and around that. And so the young punks. And there is sort of it feels to me the beautiful explorations of self-discovery, as you were saying, we go to these retreats, take myself into silence, and we do this work. But within the West, for people feeling isolated and seeking that community, I don't know, how did you find that?
We have to seek it out. When I sort of started to, it's dangerous to say things like wake up, because actually the waking up is a renewing practice that we have to do all the time. Otherwise it just becomes sort of like, a weed patch where the weeds grow back again. Yeah. So, but when I first started getting involved with consciousness raising in myself, I recognized that the people I was hanging out with were all smoking dope and sort of not interested in anything very much, were not the people I needed to be around. And bit by bit, I had to find avenues into people of like mind and to sort of like to connect with people of like mind. It took me a long time. Yeah. And it was quite lonely along the way as well, because I was sort of like, I was sort of whistling in the dark and not really knowing what I was whistling for even. Yeah. So I think, it's like, I think it's great that you're in your early 30s and you're on a quest. At your age, I was an arsehole, I'm probably still that, but it's like, I sort of feel like, it's our evolving, our experiencing of life that makes us wise if we allow it to. If we allow it to. And also to gather with people with whom we have clear connection. I'm bored if I'm not with people who have deep connection with. Yeah. I hear that entirely. There's something where just the mundanity of a conversation. I crave depth all the time. What did you watch on telly? What's the weather like today? We look for distraction. Yeah, fine for every now and then, but it becomes just so numb and still, doesn't it? And what makes your heart sing? How will you live this one wild and precious life? That's beautiful. What makes your heart sing? And I suppose that is but for me, that's the radar that guides me through the darkness. Yeah.
those moments where we realize, the group I'm around, the people I'm associating myself with aren't benefiting any form of self-awareness, emotional growth, spiritual growth. And then sometimes it does have to be an act of severance, doesn't there? You have to consciously go, I'm separating myself.
Yeah.
And sometimes that just happens organically.
Yeah.
So I suppose this is making me think about the people that are scared, the people that hold on to these communities that aren't good for them, know sort of inside that it's right to begin breaking apart, to move into new horizons, but there's the fear of the unknown, because this is the safe.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why we need to not be reckless, but we need to be adventurous in discovering ourselves, in doing something that might be outside of our norm. So, for example, going on when I first got into all this sort of stuff, I went on retreats. I went to meditation camp with Pir Vilayat Khan, who's the Sufi leader, and it was 2 weeks in the Alps, where there was a lot of chanting sacred sounds and meditations and deep practice with people, and it was uplifting. We were away from above the world in the high Alps, and just really sort of like, this gives me a taste of what it would be like.
Yeah. And after you had those experiences, then what do you feel when you have to sort of reintegrate back into?
Well, then you've got to integrate it.
And then you've got to integrate.
So there's a Sufi story about a man who sort of spends 15 years in the wilderness, completely on his own, and he finds a place of complete peace and tranquility. And then he goes down into the marketplace, and someone jostles it. He turns around and goes, and actually, that's the test of whether it's real.
Yeah,
we can all do it in isolation. Can you do it in relationship? And often in the relationship with another, it's basically one of the big learnings is.
Yeah, that feels to me where the mirrors are really activated.
Exactly. Yeah, and we'll have our projection on them. They'll have a projection on us. In fact, someone will say there'll be 6 people in a relation. There's you, me, who I think you are, who they think I am, who I think I am, who they think they are. So there's all these different parts, and also the different parts of ourselves. So I might be with someone and in a really wise, sort of profound space. I go, that's good. And then I find myself triggered by something, and I'm like a tantruming child again. So all of these are part of us.
Yeah.
And the task is to be conscious.
Yeah. And I suppose name it, take responsibility.
Exactly. And Barbara Summers puts it very well, who was Ian Gordon Brown, who I mentioned before, she was the co-founder of transpersonal psychology.
Yeah.
She said, she talked about women, but this is equally true for men. She said that women have a wardrobe with 7 outfits on. So there's the outfit that's worn by the crone, by the seductress, the outfit that's worn by the sort of the guru, and if you're wise, you'll wear the right outfit to the right setup.
Right.
But if you're not wise, you'll find yourself caught in the wrong place. So, for example, if you're in a space where you're sort of like ready to meditate very deeply and you're walking down Oxford Street, it ain't going to work too well.
Yeah. Okay. So we have to attune ourselves to the surroundings.
And then choose to adapt to those surroundings. Yeah. And also accept that sometimes those surroundings are not going to be nourishing.
Yes. And
just stop fighting them, but just go, okay, well, there'll be nourishment later.
I'm observing this. I'm accepting
exactly.
This. Yeah, it really makes me think about the archetypes here. And how we do have the capacity, like they affect us, within the Jungian line of thinking. They have the autonomous function. They sort of can influence us through our consciousness, the collective unconscious. But then I think there's a way of embodying, like this is like the way the drama therapy comes in, of like understanding particular archetypes. I'm reminded of this because you used the word the crone, the seductress, did you say? These different sort of traditionally associated feminine, the feminine archetypes.
Yeah, they are.
They are. And so like I'm curious as to that has been a very healing thing for me, is to understand that and to explore them. But they're also dark archetypes.
Oh yeah. The devil is not, it's not something we've dreamed up out of nowhere. Right. So we also carry the demonic within us if we allow it. And if we feed it enough, then we create demonic activity.
Yes.
Because we actually, if we practice ill doing daily, we will lose connection with our consciousness. and we'll lose compassion for others.
Yeah.
So I've often looked at, I've read a lot of books on the Holocaust, and I've often looked at, was this a nation of psychopaths? That, there was, the sort of ways that people minorities were treated, especially the Jews, the Gypsies, the homosexuals.
Yeah.
It's like that all of those were treated in such a foul way. And you get someone like Mengele, who was at Auschwitz, who was choosing who would live and who would die, and experimenting on children and all this sort of stuff. And you go, anyway, a psychologist went to the Nuremberg trials and went to interview all the defendants, Himmler, Goebbels, all of the big Nazis, expecting to find an extraordinary breed of human being, not extraordinarily wonderful, but extraordinarily fucked up.
Yeah.
And found that they were very normal. And that's the thing, is like if we practice good, then we become good. And if we practice evil, we become evil.
Yeah.
It's not quite as black and white as that, but that's pretty much it. I know if I'm working with my heart constantly, then I am doing good in the world. I'm feeling good about myself.
Yeah. It makes me think about possession. People can just become overridden by these a demonic energy.
Yeah.
But then if we were to flip it into like, I don't know, like if you welcome in the archetype of like the Messiah, and that then become destructive on the other side.
Well, it can, you see, because if you welcome in as a Messiah as an archetype, you can also welcome in your arrogant arsehole.
Yeah.
Alongside that archetype.
Everybody.
Yeah. We can take refuge in that.
Yeah.
So I think it's like really learning to befriend ourselves and know ourselves.
Yeah. And the curious thing about that is we then have to accept that within us is the devil, is the light. I don't know what I want to call the archetype for that. But we're jostling with it all the time as humans, right? It's always there in every single moment.
Yeah, jostling with it. And Ram Dass used to say, you don't resist evil. You don't fight. You don't wrestle with evil.
Yeah.
You work with good. I just want to come back to my book for a second.
Yeah, please. I was going to say, how do people get your book?
So my book is called Slay Your Dragons with Compassion.
Yeah.
And I wrote it because my daughter died, and I recognized that I had developed some skills in myself that had supported me through that period. And so I managed to chronicle them and set up some exercises. And it's not a brief memoir, but I wrote it, and it was like, it was just, I'm so proud of it, because I feel like I actually captured my process in a book. And that was so wonderful. And I remember I had a heart attack a couple of years ago, and I was in the ambulance being blue lighted to hospital and thinking I might die. And there's sort of all these fears around, and suddenly it's this moment of peace. Right. And I thought, I've written my legacy book. I've done mostly good in this world. I'm ready to go if that's what I'm ready to do. And then afterwards I thought, it must have been the morphine that they gave me. But I spoke to someone who was a professor a psychological professor, and he said, not everyone who gets morphine will have that experience. Okay. Yes, the morphine will have coloured it, but it will also have come from somewhere. And then I felt better about it, but more balanced about it. Yeah. But actually, there was a place of peace I reached, whether it was with the aid of morphine, which sometimes it is, but whatever. But I think for me, and it's like I would just want to suggest this as for people, that you find a way of expressing who you are. For me, it was writing a book. For you, it might be painting. There's a guy I was working with in Spain last week, and he was a social worker, and but he found that he loved capturing things in art. He would spend hours in painting, and that brought him such joy. He found his medium for finding peace. And I think we have to find our medium, whether it be art, literature, music. Some people I know, when they play music, they enter a different sphere. They just become the music.
That's so beautiful. Find your way for creating peace. And I do think we all have a gift to find and to bring, right? And one that does, if we find a way to create peace, then my belief is that will then ripple into the world.
Exactly, that's the thing. It's like, when the ripple gets strong enough, the world changes.
Exactly. And it starts with people doing the work taking themselves on, taking responsibility.
Yeah. And not being overwhelmed by the terrible things that happen in the world, because it's very easy to be overwhelmed by that and feel like you can't do anything.
Yeah,
But you can do something in your patch.
exactly. It's the one thing we do have control over. It's
Yeah.
how we navigate. And
Yeah, so Ramdas said, he said that, you know, at one level, everything is happening exactly as it should.
yeah,
At another level, there is suffering, and it's our dharma, it's our duty
yeah,
to deal with what suffering comes in our path.
yeah.
So that's what I've tried to set out in Slay Your Dragons.
That's so beautiful.
It's on Amazon, it's in, you find it in bookstores.
I can put a link in the description.
That'd be wonderful.
Break their way. And just to continue, because I'm now interested, you had this moment where you were at peace with life or death. And you I think it's fair to say that you're a spiritual being. So I'm interested with, do you have a relationship with reincarnation and afterlife?
I think the reality is I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know is a much more mature statement for me than there isn't or there is.
Yeah.
I think actually I'm in a process of inquiring. What does that mean? And I'm in a process of experiencing. Maybe my dreams will guide me in that direction. And maybe my connection with other beings will guide me in that direction. I certainly think that we are, my feeling is that the great mystics have told us that we are eternal beings.
Yeah.
And my feeling is that we do, but I don't think it's as simple as that, you know, we've all come back because we were all Beethoven at one time. Everyone, you know, where's the farm worker in this reincarnation theory? You know, everyone's some great being, Cleopatra or Bath or whatever.
I think Eddie has a stand-up where he says 3 Napoleons turned up to a past life. No, I think there is, you know, my belief structure is that there is reincarnation. I've had past life regression therapy, and that's what reminded me of this, because I've experienced that like moment where that life, you die, you move on. I got guided sort of out of my body and had a similar experience at that time. But this life I'm still working towards finding that.
And you're very young, and you know, we have seasons of our lives. You're still in the spring of your years. You're in the place of out there, sort of like exploring, discovering. I'm approaching the winter of my years, whereas the time of winter is a time of contemplation. So I'm now looking back on my life, and not looking to sort of, you know, I love exploring. I love adventuring still. But it's like it's more now at making sense of what has been. You're still in the place of creating what will be. And it's right, it's like that. You know, it's like we're not meant to do that at a very young age. At a very young age, you're gathering experiences. But I think when we look at people who come into our lives, sometimes we'll know them at a very deep level. It's like, how does that happen? And it's like, you know, today a friend of mine set me up with a blind date, and I had lunch with a woman today. It was very attractive. And I rang him afterwards and I said, she's really nice, we had a really good dialogue. But I don't think it's chemistry. They said, but she's a really attractive woman. So that's not what it's about. It's actually whether there's a sense of knowing. And I think that sense of knowing is probably linked with what you're talking about with reincarnation. So I've met people sometimes and I've known from immediately almost that they're going to be close.
That knowing is it feels to me a holy experience. When you look at somebody in the eyes and it's like, I know you from somewhere.
Exactly.
But I don't know why. And sometimes that is beautiful, holy and beautiful, and sometimes that is terrible.
I know, it's true. But I mean, I do feel like, you know, when I met you, I did feel a knowing.
We've always had
that. There's a sense of connection. And I'm, you know, as I talk about it, I'm moved by it as well, Josh. You know, because you said something about that we normally hang out with people of our own age. But I think if we're looking at a spiritual life, we often hang out with people of various ages because we've all got something to teach each other.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I'll share this because a few years ago when I was exploring these past life regressions, I had a past life experience and you were in it.
Oh, wow.
And you were my hero. No, it felt like we were actually sort of in, it felt like we were homeless in this, like we were living under a bridge, and you were sort of my guardian.
Wow.
I remember seeing your face, you had this beautiful, as you still do, it's wise face, but I was this little girl in this past life. And I had this feeling of being really abandoned by my parents in that life. And you took me in, and I just knew it was you. I didn't say it to the therapist I'm speaking.
Amazing.
I've never really said to anybody I've known it's you. So
I think that happens. There are people with whom we have a depth of connection, and that is almost certainly around past lives.
Yeah. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful for you being here.
I'm very happy to be here.
Very humble, touched.
Yeah.
Sat on this sofa opposite me.
Ta-da.
Your work sounds really beautiful when holding those groups.
I'm very happy with my work. It's like I am doing. It's really funny because it's like I feel like in most other careers, if I'd chosen them, you retire or but I feel like I've got better. Although I'm 73 now, and it's like so 10 years time will I be better? Well, actually, I might have Alzheimer's. I might have disabilities of all sorts of kinds. So there will come a point where it will decline.
Yeah.
But right now, I'm the best I've ever been, and I just have to live right now. Really, that's all.
Yeah. So you use the word you're in your winter, but it feels like there's a beauty in everything that you're saying.
And there's a beauty in grief as well. There's a beauty in all sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I'm discovering, that everything is beautiful if you allow us to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. You can see the grace in it.
Yes.
There's that Rumi quote that's like, when life forces you to your knees, that's when you realize you can pray. I'm paraphrasing it, but
That's beautiful.
Along those
Well, Rumi or Joshua Erlick, so
I paraphrase Rumi. But it is, I have found that those moments of absolute agony, I haven't experienced what you've been through, but it has been those moments where something shifted, where the work happens in a different way.
I don't regret anything I've been through that. Obviously I wouldn't wish for my daughter to die, but I can see that it's part of who I am now. And sometimes I'll talk about her and it's like, I'll have tears flooding into my eyes. And sometimes I won't. I'll tell you one very interesting thing before we go. This is so she was not the result, she was not my child with my ex-wife. She was a result of a short relationship. And her mother and I had a really difficult relationship for years and years and years. So much so that her mother refused to allow me to speak at Melissa's funeral, which I thought was a very violent act.
Yeah.
And but 6 months after Melissa died, there was a playback theatre performance in honour of her life in London, where I was living.
Playback theatre?
Yeah.
I've heard the name. It's ringing bells from my uni days. But
So it's quite a nice little technique where there's an actors play out what's given to them by the audience. And so I turned up there, and Melissa's mother turned up there, and she and I had been and I hadn't been able to breathe for Melissa's death. I thought there was something wrong with me, and I was stuck, and blah blah blah. Anyway, her mother started ramming into me, and both our sons came and stood with us and held a space where we got into a relationship with each other beyond the fury. And I remember taking her in my arms and sobbing. And it was like at that moment, I stopped wishing her ill. I wished her well. I didn't know not the words, but just that changed in me. And suddenly I was able to grieve for my daughter. And hatred had kept me away from the place where grief needed to make it something like that.
Yeah. It feels like it's the bandage.
Yeah, exactly.
Then we feel it.
Stripped off, and I've never spoken to her since that day, by the way. So this is 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And I've never spoken to her since then. But that's all right.
Yeah. A really powerful healing moment.
Yeah.
It feels like a really strong metaphor for just like the hatred that's in the
world. Exactly.
And what we're sitting with. And
oh, I've got one more story. Can I tell you?
Of course. No, but there's no.
There's much. Yeah. There is a bit.
There's so much. Okay. I'll see how the time is. We're fine. Yeah. Cool.
So Melissa's mother poisoned her against me, and I'm not saying that. I'm saying she undermined me a lot, and so Melissa had a lot of time, didn't really have a lot of respect for me until she came to Skiros, where I was working, and then we got close, and that was wonderful. I'm so glad we had those times. Anyway, after Melissa died, I was longing to have a dream about her, and about 6 months after she died, I finally had a dream that I found out where she was, and I telephoned. Someone had asked the phone. I said, Melissa, I'll just get her. And so this voice comes to me on the phone, very flat. Melissa had gone very high and then very low. Very flat, said, hello, Mum. I said, it's not Mum, it's Dad. She hung up. And I had nothing more 2 years. Fast forward 18 months, I had another dream. And I was at a party. I'd gone to a party, and this mum was standing in the doorway of the party. But I sort of ghosted past her, and I looked over and I saw Melissa bright and vibrant. And she looked over at me with just such love in her eyes. And I was so touched. And I came back at that dream and was just rejoicing. But here's the interesting thing. This is what we're talking about, what goes on beyond our consciousness. I rang my daughter Alex at the same time. How do you do that?
That just shows, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm not going to say what it shows, but it just shows.
It shows.
It shows.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, thank you very much, Josh. It's been really lovely hanging out with you and chatting with you.
My real pleasure. Yeah, thank you for all the words you shared and sharing your story. Really, really.
I think stories are what we can do as human beings. Well, that's where I noticed the feelings came through as I told the story.
Yeah, we were there. We were with you.
Yeah,
really feeling it, and that is it. Right now, we have all of that shown to us.
Yeah.
We're on Netflix. We're watching it all. It's fine, but it is kind of a distraction. Through story. Apparently, storytellers used to be revered. It was like a storyteller around our table.
Yeah.
And
I've seen great storytellers in action, and they do transform the space.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah,
it's a skill that we sort of work with. We tell myths as drama.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
So
it's great that you're studying drama therapy. It's up my street as well.
Yeah.
So.
No, I'm qualified.
Fantastic.
Professional, doing it out in the sticks. Yeah, excellent. It's good. It's really, really meaningful work.
Great.
And creative. So the world's alive.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I wish you just beautiful adventure moving forward.
Thank you. I want to see my grandson now.
Okay.
Yeah.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark.